Okay, so we're rolling. Sovereignty Part 3. So we left off with the 13 colonies becoming sovereign states, meaning that the people owned the land and the people were the sovereigns. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that each one of those was a sovereign state and independent, and they had all the rights to each one of those states. Now, I can't give you a hard and fast on this, but the way I understand the drive to the confederation of those states was simply that somebody said we got to have collective military defense because we can't have England unilaterally attack Maine, and France go after Virginia or Spain go after South Carolina or whatever. So we got to get an attack on one being an attack on all, and out of joint military defense comes joint diplomacy. And then the third thing really was a need to have some kind of a Congress where the states could solve their problems between, New York and Virginia, or tariff issues or trade or whatever. And so that's the way I understand was the drive to bring the whole thing together. So what that meant is that the sovereigns of each state were asked, would they give these rights and would they give those rights? And they said, no, 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 we just want the bare minimum necessary to build what is functionally a military alliance of states, hence a confederacy. Whereas a federation is a far more extensive giving of rights and pooling yourself into something that looks more like a nation. Yeah, so really you had this sort of military alliance thing coming up called the United States. And these guys went on to produce what I regard as the most sublime civilization document, the Constitution for the United States of America. Okay, so if you're living in Canada, what happened up there? Well, by 1791, when I think it was Hamilton and these guys were issuing securities and, making good on their war debt and that kind of stuff, England went and decided that they would take this piece of land that was today southern Quebec and southern Ontario and put it together as a new colony called the Upper Lower Canada Colony. So Upper Canada became Ontario and Lower Canada became Quebec. And it was called Lower Canada because it was right there at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, and it was lower in altitude compared to up towards the Great Lakes where you were climbing in altitude. It should also be noted for both Canadians and Americans that Upper Canada was kind of a backwater to Lower Canada, because Lower Canada is where the population was, it's where the money was, it's where the culture was. It's really where the power and the influence was. It was right there, Quebec City, at the mouth of the river, and Montreal a little bit further up. And in 1791, there weren't a lot of roads around. There weren't any trains, planes, automobiles, telecommunications whatsoever. And Ontario was effectively, even from the time of 1532 at the founding of Quebec City, always a kind of a hinterland to Lower Canada or Quebec. So it was a feeder economy thing, and it was always the poor sister. And this economic reality went all the way up until the 1970s, until the French nationalists in Quebec started kicking the English out and pushing them up to Ontario, where the tête carrée des blocs live. Yeah, get out. And by the way, I have no beef with Quebec trying to, hold on to their turf and their culture. I wish the rest of Canada thought a bit more like that. But that's an aside. Maybe we'll get to that later. But the point is that there was this new colony created in 1791, which consisted of this poorer sister, Upper Canada, back up there in the hinterland, and the richer sister, Quebec, Lower Canada. And if anybody thinks that the British just sort of took that punch in the head at the Revolutionary War and went back and said, whoa, I guess that's that, they're dreaming. The British have never stopped trying to get their colonies back or get control of their colonies, and that goes right up to this day with the media that is constantly slaughtering Trump because the British oligarchs hate Trump. That's the way I read the tea leaves. You can put your other thoughts down below. So the British came back in the War of 1812. Okay, now this is where the spectacular American anthem comes, written by Francis Scott Key, a lawyer of all things, produced that anthem. It's pretty amazing. Although in a way, I guess it's not, because lawyers should be wordsmiths. But the colonists in what is today Ontario, they still have their battle things at Fort York where they reenact these battles. but they were colonists of England at this time. So this is a major problem. This is why I think the people of Ontario are so screwed in the head, is because this is where their sense of nationalism starts. It starts fighting the Americans in 1812. But that was Britain's fight. It wasn't Canada's fight, and it's not my fight. But I see this kind of crazy backdated 1812 stuff going on in the Canadian national idea, and you just saw it with Trump. Trump obviously understands this, or understands something, because all he had to do was rattle the cage a bit, and it was 1812 and fighting the Americans and vote for Marxist carnage to save us from Trump. This is big in Ontario, yeah? So these people are backdated to 1812, and that's where that started, as a colony of England. The Upper Lower Canada colony. It's crazy. So that colony bumbled along all the way until 1867. Okay, so England didn't have success with the revolution, with the War of 1812, but they came back with the Civil War. Okay, so their first Jewish Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, was then the guy that started the Tory party, and he was in opposition, and he was working with Napoleon III and Emperor Maximilian of Spain to blow up the United States and get their colonies back and get their land back and fill up their colonial coffers, because they were all going broke. So Britain built a number of boats that were British made in Liverpool, keel to masthead, the CSS Alabama, the Chickamauga, the Tallahassee, and others. These were built over there in Liverpool. They were loaded up with all the weapons that you could get, the cannons, the guns, the whole thing, and they were taken down to Nassau, which was the other major deep water shipping port that the British Empire was determined to keep, along with Halifax. And they put put those warships down there, and they ran the guns into the Southern Confederacy, yeah? So that the first shot fired at Fort Sumter was by a British gun. Okay, they also made all these smaller gunboats that were designed to go out there and target Union merchant marine activities. So these are boats that are going, from Honduras and stuff, and coming up with, hemp rope or papayas or whatever, and they're making the way up for the northern Union states. And of course, some of those boats were actually bound for Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. And when they didn't show up and the trade was sunk, those colonists went down to their attorney generals and said, "Where the hell is the Navy? What the hell is going on here?" Good question. Because they were over there playing dumb, while these gunboats were going in there and attacking and causing all this war upon the Union, yeah? So, Canada, the people that have looked after you for a long time are a bunch of fucking bastards. And you don't know, because they don't teach you this stuff in school. Yeah? They don't teach you this. So this sinking of trade prompted this meeting in Charlottetown between, Charles Tupper and the other two dudes from New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. I guess I can't remember which one's which. But anyways, they were originally all the one Scottish colony in Nova Scotia. So it started out with this idea of getting back together and sort of working together, but then they decided they would go and ask Etienne Cartier of Lower Canada and John A. Macdonald of Upper Canada if they wanted to come. So they met 5 weeks later in Quebec for the Quebec resolutions, and then from that time forward, they spent the next 4 years over the course of the U.S. Civil War trying to put together ideas and resolutions for how they were going to put themselves together as a federation. And then they went to England in December 1866 to ask for a peaceable independence from the Empire. And what did the Empire say? No! No way. No independence for you. So the British Empire put together this bill under the guidance of Lord Thring of the Hereditary Peerage, right, in the House of Lords of the British Empire, called the British North America Act. And it forcibly amalgamated Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and the Upper Lower Canada colony into one colony called Canada, which meant that Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island were actually downgraded to the status of a province, which is just an administrative jurisdiction of a colony. Where they once were a colony, now they were just a jurisdiction of a colony. And the whole colony was designed under the British North America Act to be run completely out of the Crown and Chancery by the Governor General. And since the loss of the 13 colonies, the Lords of Transplantation had been taken out back for a thorough whipping, and they had decided that they were going to now make the whole thing under a colonial secretary, which was a member of the cabinet, and it was his job to pick the governor general, which went and ran the colony. So the whole power structure of Canada under the British North America Act was, yeah, you could think about passing bills in your parliaments, but you can't actually do a damn thing until the governor general says so, because the governor general ran the whole place. So the British shoved this down the throats of all the colonists, 80% of whom hated it. Only the brown nosers in Ontario liked it. And this is where they got the transfer payments started, because Ontario was the poor sister. So money was sent upriver to, help those dopes up there in Ontario who couldn't tie their shoes. And soon after that, the British went charging straight out to British Columbia and put that together with this thing called Canada. And then they did pretty much what Trump said. They put this big fake line across, and then they built the railway, and then they put this huge tariff wall, like, I don't know, 200-300%. And they forced all the people out there, the Canadians out there, to buy their stuff from the East. So the East-West problem in Canada goes right back to the very beginning, where they weren't actually able to engage in trade across the border with the United States. And all of that was done because Canada was a colony created by the British Empire as a buffer state against the United States. And what they wanted was access to the Pacific trade out of Puget Sound and Nootka Sound, or be able to take the resources across to the east and take them out the St. Lawrence Seaway, and all that. Now, if you want to check it out, you can go look up John A. Macdonald, who was listed as a minister plenipotentiary at the Treaty of Washington to settle up the debts after the Civil War. Okay, and you'll see for yourself, that was his gig. So that's how that got sorted out. And guess what that means? That means that the Canadian people were colonists, and the English still controlled all of Canada through the Crown and Chancery. So we'll leave that there, and we'll get on to part 4 shortly.